Hey guys, Mr. Mini Painter here, and welcome to this second video from the Great Beast of Gorgoroth. The second part is the Howdah. And what we are going to do here is try and achieve something like you saw over there. And to do so, I took the separate part, I didn't glue it together, but I painted it separately. And I spray painted that with some light gray because I'm going to use some contrast paints, and it's easier to paint them on a bright surface. So that's why. Be very careful when painting this because there are some heads dangling below, and I accidentally destroyed it, so I had to glue it together. But yeah, well, it's quite easy to hold it like this. So to start off with, I used dried bark for all the wooden parts. There's quite a lot of beams on this Howdah. And yeah, so I give it a base coat of dried bark. I use a fairly large brush because it's quite easy to touch all the wooden parts. They're very accessible, and yeah, well, and it's quite a large area, so don't use a small. That's too little because it's going to take a lot of time. And at this point, it's not that big of a problem if you accidentally hit, for example, part of the shield or the ropes around these beams, because we're going to paint them afterwards. So try and be as clean as possible, but it's okay if you miss or hit a different spot. So next thing I did is use Howdah brown for the straps, and I started with this strap over here, and I realized that it would be easier to do it afterwards. So I stopped doing it and I focused on those ropes on the bottom. So all the wooden parts that we painted before are held together by some ropes around this beam, as you can see over here. Try and be clean with this one because you don't want to hit the wooden parts that you painted before. And Howdah has a nice dark brown color with some red tones, some yellow in it, so it has an instant nice look, I think. We're gonna use some shading afterwards to darken it down a bit, and some highlights, of course, to bring it back up. So by now you should have something like this. This is the front of the Howdah. You see the ropes here I painted. And also on the bottom. There's quite some repetition in this paint job. Now I used a big old brush and took some lead belcher to paint the outer plating. In the image on the website, it looked a kind of like leather, but it's dented all around and has some bolts in it. So I figured it has to be metal. I used a brush, maybe a bit too old brush, as you can see here, because I think later on I switched to another one because this was a bit too rough. But it's quite a large area. The inside of the Howdah is mainly red cloth. Only the bottom you can see the metal parts through. And what we're going to do is give this metal a color later on, make it rusted and add some differentiation, but the base tone can be this nice and shiny lead belcher. Now for the cloth showing on the outside and also the inside, I used corn red and darkened it down with a little bit of Abaddon black. So that way later on we can use pure corn red as a highlight color. Take your time with this one. Do not hit the metal parts because you have to redo them. So try and be as clean as possible. And cover the entire cloth area with this mixture of Abaddon black and corn red. So it's quite a large area, and I really like this corn red because it's the color itself is very how do you say, consistent maybe? Well, I don't know. Quite a thick paint it is, and yeah, the result looks very nice. With the lead belcher I also touched the shield, the rim of the shields hanging around, which we're going to darken down also. And that's the result so far. You see the metal parts below the corn red in the back. Now next I'm using a contrast paint Black Templar to paint the inside of the shields. I like this Black Templar because it's very transparent, so you get some grays and blacks shading instantly. It looks quite nice. All you need to do is spread the paint around like so. Make sure you don't get too big of clogging of paint, so maybe remove that which is too much if you think it needs doing. You can of course differentiate with the colors of these shields. I added some black ones, I changed it with some other colors. I like to have my orcs be dark. I want them to be a dark army, so not too bright shields like you would have for example with Rohan with the reds and the greens. This one is mainly going to be black and dark brown. So on the other shield I used, for example, here a Gorgoroth fur, make it a dark brown shield. You can choose any color you want. Next thing we're going to do is paint over with a contrast paint. I used Skeleton Horde for a first color, rusty color of the metal plates. And what I tried to do here is paint those plates in some different colors. So I did one plate with Skeleton Horde and another one I used a second contrast paint on. So try and skip one plate every now and then, as you see here. So I'm painting one, leaving one, painting one, etc. So you get some, it looks like it's put together by some scrap material that they had lying around. That's basically the idea I'm going for. I didn't thin those contrast paints down, so I put them on there pure. And for the other plate I used Wildwood, and it gives it a nice dark rusty color. Normally Wildwood would be quite bright, but with the metal below it gives this nice rusty look. And of course we are going to give it some extra details later on, so don't be scared if you think it's too orangey now. Next I'm using non-oil to give all the spikes, the metal spikes and the bolts with which they are attached to the Howdah, to darken them down. And I used pure non-oil and give it a really dark coat. I want this thing to look old, scrappy, so yeah, it needs to look worn down and put together by scrap material. At least that's what I'm going for. Next, I shaded the cloth with Carbro Crimson, and it's gonna add an extra layer of dark tones to this cloth part. I really like this Carbro Crimson because it's quite dark and it dries up very nice and non-shiny. Black Templar I used for the cloth part over here, and I took some non-oil to darken down the plates on the side as well. And what you can do is to focus mainly on the bottom part because it's more dirty and more dented, damaged, etc. And I also used the same non-oil on the wooden parts. Now normally you would go for maybe a bit more of a brown color, like Agrax Earthshade or something like this. But with this dark dried bark base color, I figured that this black non-oil would do the trick a little more better and show those edges, which are of course dark because of the shade, but can also be dark because of dirt and filth. So I chose the non-oil, which I thought gave a better result. Next, I used the Guilliman flesh for the face, the left face dangling around. I also used it on the right one, but I figured that it's not a face, it's a skull. So I used Steel Legion's wrap to base coat this skull. So the left one, the fleshy one, the right one, a skull. And they're both attached with ropes, which we're going to be painting later on. Now to paint the ropes, I used Karak stone as a base color, which gives it a nice dark ropey look, and we're going to be shading that, of course. Be very careful not to touch the flesh. And at some points it's quite hard to see which is which, if it's hair, if it's rope, but give it a lot of attention because it looks really nice when finished. For the quivers, I used rhinox hide on one of them. This one has some openings in the middle through which you can see the arrows. So you can see me here painting something like a triangle, which is like a flap holding the quiver together, and you can see the arrows on the inside. So I used rhinox hide. You can choose any kind of brown you want, of course, and I chose a different kind of brown for the other one standing on the other side. Now here I used a slightly different variation, added some Abaddon black if you want. You can choose to do it with dried bark or any other brown. And now it's time for the straps. And as I said before, and I started painting them already in the beginning, but I decided to do it later on. I used Thondia brown for all the leather straps. There are a lot of them attached to the corners of the metal plating. The shields are hanging by leather straps. The quivers are hanging by leather straps. So there's a lot of them. They go back and front. So inspect your model and make sure that you get every one of them. Next, we're going to be highlighting the rope parts here, and for that I'm using Thondia brown in a combination with Balor brown. Balor brown is more of a yellow tone, which I found to be very nice. The way I'm doing this is I'm holding my brush sideways, as you can see, and paint against the strains of the rope. I also touched the sides of the leather straps on those shields to give it a nice edge highlight. I didn't want to go too far by brightening it up with pure Balor brown or something like this, because I want it to be as dark as possible. In the end result, you want the focus to be on the beast itself and the orcs on the inside. So this is like it has to support the rest by color. Next, for the ropes, I'm using Agrax Earthshade to shade them down. I'm using it in a pure form, didn't thin it down. And next, Corn Red for the cloth. Pure Corn Red is a very nice red color, I think. What I did here is focus on the parts that would catch the light, so leave the shaded, the recessed areas of your model. And at this point it's very good to realize what is going to be the main focus of your model. Of course, it's going to be the front because that's the part that you're facing most when using it in the game or displaying it as a diorama set. So I focused with some Evil Sun's Scarlet on the basically mainly the front side of the Howdah. The top parts because they would catch the light, and the bottom parts I would leave quite dark. Take your time with this because these are the final highlights that we're going to do, and they really define your model. Next I used some Abaddon Black to paint over this cloth thingy. I wanted to give her a dark leathery look, and I thought it was too bright, so I darkened it down with some thinned down Abaddon Black, leaving some of the bright parts shining through, but well, I thought it was too grey looking, so it's pure taste, but I darkened it down. Next, I took Black Templar and painted the hairs of the person on the left. He also has a beard. Be very careful not to touch the rope at this point because that's nearly done. He has a beard, some long hair. It's a bit difficult to see on the back because his head is chopped off. So you have to kind of figure out where the hair stops and the wound begins. Next, I took pure Karak stone to highlight the previously painted Steel Legion drab base coat of the skull. And next I highlighted it with some Screaming Skull to give it some edge highlights. So the sockets of the eyes, the front of the skull, the nose, the cheekbones, etc. Then I took some technical paint, Blood for the Blood God, which I really enjoy using because it gives some nice blood splattering, and I used that on the bottom of the left head. I figured that it's chopped off and there's some blood residue dripping down, so you can use that very nicely. Next I used lead belcher with a dry brush and give my metal plating some worn look. Be very careful not to touch the red parts of the cloth at this point. So go easy on it, take your time. It looks like I'm doing it very fast, but I speeded up the video, of course, and I took a real slow doing this. Next I used Stormhost Silver as a highlight for the metal parts. Focus only on the shiny parts, the sun, where the sun would hit the model and reflect the metal. So I focused mainly on the top and the front of the model. The front easily recognizable by the parts of the rope in the middle. So that's the front. That's the front right here. So I focused on the front of the chains here. The metal spikes give them some sharp edges. The shields, you can touch the corners over there if you want to make them shiny, like I did over here. Next, back to the Black Templar, and this time it's for the feathers of the arrows. Also them I wanted to be very dark and give them a coat of Black Templar, which gets some nice shade immediately. If you think it's too bright, you can go over it twice. Make sure to let it dry in between, but you can still very nicely see the shapes of the feathers. I went back with Corn Red to paint the eye on this quiver. The Eye of Sauron is on there. I took some Corn Red and I highlighted a little bit of Evil Sun's Scarlet to the very top of it. Next, I took Gorthor Brown, and with this Gorthor Brown, I am adding some Next, I added some Gorgoroth brown to highlight the edges of the quivers. It's a bit difficult to see here. I'm sorry I went a bit off camera, but I touched the corners, the straps, all the shiny parts. Here we are again. The parts that would normally be highlighted, so the edges of this quiver, to make it stand out just a little bit more. You get something like this. I also used Gorgoroth brown as a highlight on all the wooden exterior parts. So the wooden beams, the small sticking out points with the ropes over here. Take a dry brush, wipe off most of the paint because you do not want to cover it with paint, you want to be highlighting it. So go very slow, go very careful. For this cloth part over here, I used some storm vermin fur to highlight that and to make it look like it's really, there's some tension on it. So I added some lines pointing towards the middle, and it looks like it's on there quite tight. And that's it for this model. You can, of course, choose your own colors. I went for this rusty look with the dents in it, quite dark, and I really enjoy how it turned out. So I hope it gave you some tips and you're able to paint one yourself. Here's the final results, and we're off to the third and last part where we're going to be painting the orcs. Thank you so much for watching this video again. I hope you enjoyed it and you had some use with it. And I hope to see you in one of my next videos. Bye bye!